It will take me a long time to recover from what happened. I guess I hope writing this will help me make sense of it, so here we go. I grew up in a small Russian town, the kind where you can still see the old log cabin style houses with ornately carved window casings and wood stoves. In fact, I lived in exactly such a house. My parents died when I was young, so my grandma was the one who raised me. There weren't many kids around, except in the summer when city families escaped here to their datches. Most of the time I played alone in a field or in a forest near our house. Honestly, I didn't mind. I loved nature and was never bored. There were always birds, rabbits in the field, squirrels in the forest. Once, a stray cat gave birth to a litter of kittens under our porch. I played with them all summer, watching them grow up. I was not allowed to go too deep into the forest, but of course I did. That was really my domain. In the autumn I enjoyed scaring mushroom foragers by standing quietly among the trees until they noticed me. I must have been a spooky sight, a pale little blonde girl lurking in the bushes. One summer day I went a little too deep. I remember the feeling of a storm gathering. The daylight was still strong, but dark clouds were covering the sun, plunging the forest into a premature dusk. The wind was picking up, making rustling waves high up in the canopy. I started to feel uneasy, as one does before the storm. I knew I should turn back and run home before the rain broke, but I thought I noticed something in the clearing ahead. I stepped into a little patch of grass and wildflowers next to a broken trunk where I saw a stag lying on his side. I remember how huge he was, bigger than a horse. Although everything looms large in childhood memories, his tawny brown sides were heaving in slow, laborious breaths. I didn't understand why he was just lying there like that when I saw the bear trap. His hind leg was trapped, blood caked around it. This is when I did something reckless that would change my life forever. So many years later, I should have run home and told my grandma and let adults figure it out. But I couldn't bear to watch this animal suffer. I approached the stag and knelt by the bear trap. Thinking about it now, I should have been afraid that it would kick me and there would be two of us dying on the forest floor, but I just wasn't. I pried the trap open, cutting my hands in the process. It took all the strength from my tiny body to do it, but eventually it gave in. The stag was looking at me out of one mad round brown eye. As soon as his leg was free, I gingerly stepped away. The deer shuffled upright, clumsy at first. He gave me another look, huffed and staggered away into the undergrowth. I was elated. My hands hurt and it was getting darker by the minute, but I felt like a hero. This is when I realized I was being watched. I noticed a shape out of the corner of my eye, something very tall and very dark. I thought I saw a long, non-human skull and antlers, although the creature was definitely bipedal. I didn't dare to face it or linger. Instead, I turned around and ran like hell towards home. I made it inside just before the downpour started. I didn't tell my grandma about the incident, nor anyone else. Over the years I forgot about the stag, although every once in a while I had this nightmare where I was in the forest again. The creature was there with me. I always woke up just before it started to move. Apart from that, I had a pretty normal life. I graduated, moved to Moscow for university. I've always been a bit of a loner. Maybe I have a little too much social anxiety, or maybe I'm just an introvert. I don't know, but I've managed to make friends, and my life at university was a healthy mix of parties and cramming for the exams. I met Anton at one of those parties. The first time I saw him, he was playing guitar, surrounded by the gaggle of pretty girls. His shaggy blonde hair fell on his face as he was singing behind blue eyes. His eyes were more gray than blue, but none of us fans seemed to care. He was tall and broad-shouldered and had an infectious crooked smile. When he spoke to you, he made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. I knew I didn't have a chance with a guy like him, so I almost didn't believe it when he asked me on a date. For a while I couldn't figure out what he found in me, but he was so patient and so loving. Day after day he showed me how special I was to him, how precious, so eventually I started to believe it. Every day I woke up next to him, I thought how lucky I was to have this man in my life. I was in love and I was loved. Everything that was wrong with my life fell away. I didn't feel lonely anymore. We graduated university and moved in together. Both of us struggled to find work straight out of uni. He got hired for an entry-level position while I juggled waitressing gigs. The money was tight and the rent in the capital prohibitive, but we had each other. A few years later, my grandma died, leaving me our old house. I wanted to sell it, of course. I had a new life in Moscow, and I didn't want to give it up to return to my sleepy hometown. Anton, however, raised some salient points. If we could live in my grandma's house, we don't have to scrap by anymore. The rent alone will be a huge weight off our shoulders. He could work remotely, keeping his capital level salary, and I could stop working multiple menial jobs. We could finally breathe. Maybe we'll get married and start a family. We'll have each other all to ourselves. Of course I agreed. What made him happy made me happy, and he was so excited about the move that it rubbed off on me. So we packed our life in boxes, hired a van, and moved to my grandma's house at the start of the summer. Anton made friends straight away. I always loved this about him. He was such a golden retriever. Not a couple of weeks after the move, he went to fix his car and started chatting to the mechanic. Pretty soon Peter became a semi-permanent fixture of our little household. He and Anton hung out weekly, drinking beers and watching football. Usually I stayed up with them for a bit and shared a beer before heading to bed and leaving them to their guy talk. When Anton went to our local coffee shop, he made friends with Max. Max too became a regular guest, although not as frequent as Peter. It was Max who told us that they had a job opening for another barista. I was getting a little antsy at home all day, so I took the job. There were others as well, and soon Anton had a pretty busy social calendar. I felt like I was falling behind, but he always invited the guys he befriended to ours to make me feel included. I was grateful, but something was weighing on my mind. The nightmare started again a couple of weeks after we had moved. At first it went exactly as before. I woke up just as the creature started to move. A couple of times when it happened, I woke up alone in our bed. Anton was still hanging out with his new mates. I could hear them laughing downstairs, and while I desperately wanted him to come and comfort me, I didn't want to be dramatic or childish. Then it got worse. I was in the middle of this nightmare. The creature started moving, sending a wave of panic over me. I squeezed my eyes shut and willed myself to wake up. Nothing happened. The creature was getting closer. I still couldn't face it head on, but I felt the dark looming shape blocking out the light. I desperately whispered to myself, "Wake up," but nothing happened again. The creature was now right beside me. It reached out a hand towards me. It was a half-rotten deer leg, ending with human-like hands with long curved talons. The flesh was falling off the bones, and I could see maggots squirming inside the holes. It grabbed my shoulder, and I fell into a dreamless oblivion. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. Anton was in bed next to me, and I nuzzled into his chest. The sun was streaming through the shitty blacked out curtains as I took in our bedroom, the old rug, TV in the corner. Anton, still asleep, wrapped his arms around me, and I felt safe. I knew it was just a stupid nightmare. I had a shift at the coffee shop with Max that day. Although I felt guilty about it, I didn't really like Max. He always had a sense of unfounded superiority about him, despite his shabby clothes and slightly greasy hair. He bragged about how he can find just about anything on the dark web, and how much weed he smokes. But what got to me the most is that he never passed an opportunity to touch me when we worked together. A hand on the small of my back as he was passing through, standing too close when we were restocking the shelves, that sort of thing. I didn't say anything to Anton though. We needed more friends in the new place, and all of my school friends moved away or lost touch. He was making an effort, and I didn't want to sabotage it. After an uncomfortable but uneventful shift, we closed the shop and parted ways. I usually walked home just past the edge of the forest. Dusk began to fall as I walked along the road, headphones in, lost in thought. I paused the podcast when I thought I saw someone among the trees, a tall dark shape terminating in a deer skull with wide, broken antlers. It was the creature from my dreams. My heart sank and the cold, paralyzing fear gripped me. I swear I hear a faint, barely distinguishable wake up in the rustle of the trees. I blinked and the creature was gone. In its place, I saw a large blackened tree stump, branches of a white birch protruding from right behind it. The shape and the antlers, this is what my anxious mind has mistaken for a hellish bipedal deer skeleton. Feeling stupid and shaken, I went home to Anton. Thankfully that night no one else was around. We cuddled on the sofa and rewatched one of our favorite TV shows before going to bed. Anton seemed a little preoccupied. He'd been having a stressful time at work, so I decided not to add to his worries with whatever it was I thought I saw. That night the nightmare returned, but it was different. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was standing in a cul-de-sac in town. I recognized a place. It was somewhere in a residential area on the opposite side of town. It was the middle of the night. No one was on the street. I heard approaching footsteps and saw a man in a black hoodie with headphones on, walking on the opposite side of the road towards me, swaying slightly. As the man approached, I recognized Max. The creature stood in Max's way. It wasn't there a second before, but now the dark shape was blocking the man's path. Max was looking at the ground, focusing on not tripping up, so he almost stumbled right into the creature. He looked up, his eyes widening with horror. I wanted to scream, to tell him to run, but I couldn't make a sound. Clearly, I was meant to be an observer in this scene. The creature's arm shot forth, plunging directly into the young man's stomach with a squelch. Long bony claws hooked under his ribs as it dragged Max closer. The man tried to dig his heels into the pavement, resisting the pull. The creature slowly lifted Max a couple of feet in the air, leveling its face with his. Max opened his mouth to scream, but the creature's other hand reached his throat first. The skeletal hand squeezed around the man's neck, holding him firmly in place, stopping him from drawing a breath, let alone screaming. Then the creature, still fixing Max by the neck, dragged its other hand down, tearing through the man's stomach, guts, and pelvis. As Max's intestine plopped on the asphalt with the sound of wet pot noodles, I once again lost consciousness. As much as I didn't want to go, I had a shift the next morning. In a way, I thought it would be comforting to see Max, alive and well. Oh, how we would laugh about that silly dream, I thought. Except, of course, I wasn't planning on telling him about it. When I arrived at the coffee shop, I was greeted by the police tape and a friendly woman in plain clothes who wanted me to answer some questions. My guts were in knots when we sat down at one of the tables and she took out her pocketbook. She introduced herself as Maria, the detective in charge of the case. She was a serious-looking woman in her mid-30s with a tidy plate and an unassuming face. She asked me questions about my relationship with Max, where and when I saw him last, and if I ever noticed anything strange about him or the company he kept. I answered truthfully, of course, that I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I mentioned the dark web stuff as well, just in case it will be relevant to the case. She carefully evaded all of my questions about what exactly had happened before she got everything she wanted out of me. The whole time I felt like I was hiding a terrible dark secret. But what was I supposed to say? I had a scary dream, that's all. How could it possibly have anything to do with whatever happened to Max? After I'd asked what happened for the 100th time, Maria closed her pocketbook and gave me a measuring look. Max's body was found on his street last night. The cause of death is unclear at this moment. I'm afraid we can't release any more information. A cold dread clenched my stomach. The body and last night. Whatever was happening to me was real. It couldn't have been a coincidence that Max died on the same night from an unclear cause of death, as I watched him getting disemboweled by the creature that had been haunting my dreams from the moment I'd stepped foot in this town. The policewoman gave me her card and told me to call if I remember anything else before sending me home for the rest of the day. Peter was over again. He and Anton were watching ice hockey this time. I was irritated that I couldn't speak to Anton about what happened, so I didn't stay with them and went to bed early instead. In the days following Max's death, I took to the internet. Googling death dream real and prophetic dreams got me nowhere. The research on the creature led only to various folk tales about supernatural forest inhabitants. While my grandma used to leave out a bowl of milk for the domovoi, I didn't really believe in spirits, benevolent or otherwise. Desperate, I trawled through the town's Facebook group to see if anyone knew anything about Max. Someone had leaked the crime scene photos of the gutted body and the theories were running rampant. This confirmed my worst suspicions. Max was killed exactly in the way I saw him die. One woman in the comments caught my eye. She kept popping up in every thread about Max's murder with cryptic statements about vengeful spirits with animal heads. The detail was too specific to miss, so I looked her up. Her profile picture showed a plump, smiling woman in her late 60s. She was wearing a bright purple patchwork dress and multiple chunky necklaces. Her profile advertised all sorts of spiritual services, from tarot reading to home cleansing, and there was an address. I don't know what exactly I was hoping to achieve, but the following day I was standing in front of a squat bright green cottage with an overgrown kitchen garden and chickens running wild around it. As I was about to walk up to the stoop, I heard my name. I turned around to see Maria trudging through the tall grass. We were equally unpleasantly surprised to see each other. I didn't lie about wanting to talk to this woman about Max's death. What I did lie about is why. I went for a mix of he was my friend and being worried about a supernatural menace roaming the town. I don't think the policewoman bought it, but she didn't challenge me. She, in turn, referred to following a lead, but I knew she was clutching at straws, just like I was. In the end, we decided to go and talk to the woman in the cottage together. I'm sure it was a breach of a protocol or whatever, but Maria seemed to be glad to have company. I'm not sure why, but I started to like her too. Just before we could knock on the door, it opened. The Facebook woman stood in the doorway, just as plump, smiley, and hippie-ish as her profile picture. She ushered us in as if she was expecting both of us and offered tea. We sat around a beaten-up wooden table in a small kitchen littered with jars of preserves and crochet doilies. A fat ginger cat sat on the windowsill, pointedly ignoring all of us. The woman introduced herself as Polina Palaneva, a holistic healer and a spiritual guide. Maria jumped right in with the questions. She wanted to know why Polina was so interested in the murder and what she knew about the victim, but the old woman ignored her. Looking mostly at me, she explained with unquestioning certainty that as soon as she saw the leaked photos, she knew it was a work of Aleshi. When both Maria and I admitted to our regrettable lack of folklore knowledge, she explained that Aleshi was a forest spirit. The big and scary kind, not a cute and mischievous one. Aleshi protected the forest and everything in it, and only ventured out if someone did something really nasty, like ran over a fox or something. Maria asked, amused. No, Polina was dead serious. Something much worse. You'll see when you get that hard drive back. I was confused and Maria looked completely aghast. She demanded to know how the old woman knew about the hard drive, but Polina just blew her off somehow. I don't know how it happened, but the next thing I knew, we both stood outside the cottage again, and the old woman was waving us goodbye with a cheery smile. Just as confused Maria and I were turning away, Polina called my name. I know it's scary, but you have to invite him in. He will help. Her expression was kind and regretful. I opened my mouth to thank her or perhaps ask what she meant, but she was gone. Maria and I were standing by the policewoman's car, parked on the side of the road, about 200 meters from the cottage. What the fuck just happened? Maria looked at me wide-eyed. I couldn't offer anything useful in return. Instead, I asked her what the deal was with the hard drive. Maria hesitated for a moment but explained that the police found an encrypted hard drive at Max's flat. It was currently being worked on in the capital, and they were expecting the contents back soon. Before we parted ways, Maria insisted I put her number in my phone. I didn't think she understood what was going on any better than I did, but I knew she thought I was somehow linked to the murder. Did she think I was in danger, or did she think I was involved? With these questions unanswered, I headed home. That night I decided to ask Anton about Max. They hung out a fair bit, and I thought maybe he knew something about what might have been on his friend's computer that warranted the extra security measures. I didn't think much of it, really. He was buying weed online, so no wonder he was concerned about privacy. Anton got very cold with me. He said he doesn't stick his nose into his friend's business, and neither should we. He said that the man just died a gruesome death, and it was fucked up of me to play detective. Of course he was right. He was much closer with Max than I was, so it must have been hard for him. At least I was sensible enough not to bring up the dream I had about Max's death. Over the next couple of days I placated Anton with homemade dinners and sex, and eventually things got better between us. One night I came home to see Anton, Peter, and a third guy I didn't know on our living room couch. They had their usual beers, but all three of them seemed jittery, their eyes shining, their voices just a little too loud and boisterous. I pulled Anton aside in the kitchen and asked if they were on something. I didn't feel good about a bunch of people I barely knew doing drugs in our house. Anton slammed the fridge shut and told me in an angry hiss that I should stop policing what he can and can't do and maybe focus on my own shit, like finding a proper job. I fought back tears, smiled politely at the guests, and excused myself to the bedroom where I cried myself to sleep. Of course, that night the dream returned. The forest, the stag, and the creature, Leshy. He was getting closer, and once again I couldn't will myself awake. Once again I was frozen in terror as the rotten claws grabbed my shoulder. The deer skull got very close to my head and the voice whispered, "Wake up." I woke up. But this time the nightmare was not over. A man was on top of me, moving inside me. I couldn't move or open my eyes. I couldn't even cry out. I could smell the sour of his sweat, the beer on his breath. It was not Anton. Where was Anton? I felt like a rag doll being stuffed again and again. I heard voices from the hallway, felt like come on behind my eyelids as someone flipped the switch. "Are you having a good time here?" It was Anton's voice. The man on top of me grunted as he came, and I felt his weight shift off from me. "She's a trooper, you didn't lie." I heard him fasten his belt. Anton laughed. "Told you, worth every penny." That was Peter. The three of them quipped as I lay there, open and paralyzed. Anton reassured the other two that the stuff he'd given me was strong enough for me to be out cold all night, and they had plenty of time. They left the room, laughing, and I heard the TV come back on. With an effort that felt like moving a boulder, I could open my eyes, just a slit. I was in my bed, my phone charging on the bedside table. Even if I could reach it, there's no way I could pick it up, unlock the screen, and call for help. That was it. All I could do was to lie there, waiting for the men to return for another round. My phone lit up and I saw Maria's name on the screen. It buzzed on silent once, twice. I willed my hand to move, and it jerked a little towards the phone. I focused all my will on that round green button. I just had to press the round green button. My hand moved again. With every buzz, I felt the hope draining. How long did I have before she gave up? Or before it went to voicemail? My finger clumsily hit the target. "Hello, are you there?" The sweetest voice in all the world came through the speaker. I wanted to scream for help, but I couldn't. Moving my hand took out every ounce of strength I had left. I slipped into the darkness again. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious. I heard the voices of the three men approaching the room again, but they came as if through a dense fog. I didn't want to be present for what happened next anyway. I let myself float away. Through the same thick fog I heard a woman's voice, shouting. There was a noise of struggle, of furniture being upturned. The men were shouting as well. Then there was a gunshot. With great effort, I opened my eyes again just as the three men and the woman stumbled into the room. Peter was clutching his arm, repeating "fuck." Blood was seeping through his fingers. Anton was holding Maria's hands behind her back as the policewoman screamed and struggled to get free. The third guy was holding a gun as if it was a dead rat. His face was wild with fear and confusion. Anton knocked Maria on the head and she stumbled on the floor. She refused to lose consciousness. The men were screaming at each other, trying to decide what to do. The discussion was going firmly in the direction of a body in a ditch. I observed all of this with a detached sense of the inevitable. I didn't want Maria to die because of me, but my life was over anyway, so none of this mattered that much. My eyes swept the room when I saw the dark shape standing in the corner opposite the bed. The antlers were almost scraping the ceiling, the deer skull staring right back at me. "You have to invite him in. He'll help." I thought, why not? I looked directly into the black eye sockets of the deer skull. "Come in." Peter was the first one to see the creature. Suddenly his eyes widened as he let out a high-pitched shriek. The Leshy was right in front of him in a blink. A blink later, Peter's left arm and a large chunk of his torso were on the floor as his knees buckled, and he slid down, his eyes still wide. I could see the brilliant white of his ribs sticking out from the side. Next, Anton's head with a trail of his spine thumped on the carpet next to terrified Maria. The third guy was halfway to the door when the Leshy blocked the way. He lifted the screaming man upside down by the legs and slowly started to pull apart. I don't think I will ever forget the sound of a body ripped in half lengthwise. In the sudden quiet, I could hear Maria's heavy breathing. She was still on the floor, her back to the wall, shaking. She looked at me, her face splattered with blood, her eyes wide. The Leshy was gone. I wanted to say something comforting to her, but I still couldn't get anything out. One last time I slipped into oblivion. I don't know how Maria managed to get us out of this with my record clear and her career intact. The official police report painted an unlikely picture, a rape interrupted by a deadly bear attack. Max's death was retroactively attributed to the same cause. Maria told me that night the decrypted hard drive came back. On it, she discovered pornographic pictures of me with different men, including Max. The police also got a hold of chat logs confirming that Anton had run this operation since we moved in. She called me immediately, and when she didn't hear anything on the other end, she rushed to my house, alone, guns blazing, like an idiot. According to her, she tried to arrest the men at the house but was overpowered. I have been there for the rest. When the dust settled, Maria and I went back to Polina Polineva's cottage. We only found charred remains of a building. The land registry showed that the cottage burned down in the 1950s. There's no Facebook profile or comments from a woman with that name. I sold my grandma's house and moved back to Moscow. I'm in therapy now for the not supernatural part. I've reconnected with my friends from uni and I'm trying my best to move on from everything that happened. Maria got offered a promotion and moved to Moscow as well. We meet up for coffee sometimes, but I don't think we're going to be brunching and doing sleepovers anytime soon, not after what we've both witnessed. The dream has not returned since. I guess the lushy considers his debt paid, and I can't say I'm not relieved. I try to get out of the city to nearby forests almost every weekend. I just walk there, feed the squirrels, that sort of thing. I am also leaving out a bowl of milk for the domovoi every night. You never know when you might need allies. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.